When Tiger Woods started sneaking into a quiet Ohio backyard to use a neighbor's pool, he thought no one would notice. But what he didn't know was that the man who owned that pool wasn't just any homeowner. He was a retired Marine and ex-police officer named Jerome Davis. And the moment Tiger laughed off the trespassing as just water, he made the biggest mistake of his career. Because Jerome didn't call the cops. He confronted him face to face. What happened next became a national story, and a powerful reminder that respect isn't earned by fame. It's earned by character. This wasn't the first time. Jerome had kept quiet the last few weeks, brushing it off as coincidence. A ripple here, a misplaced towel there. The scent of unfamiliar cologne lingering by the poolside. At first, he gave it the benefit of the doubt. But benefit runs out when boundaries are crossed. And tonight, they were crossed for the last time. Word had been spreading across the neighborhood, murmured in backyards and whispered over fences. Tiger Woods had moved into the sprawling estate next door, a celebrity among mortals. But with that fame came arrogance, or at least, that's how it looked when security cameras began catching glimpses of a shadowy figure doing laps in Jerome's private pool. He had kept quiet. He had stayed calm. But Jerome Davis didn't earn his peace by being a pushover. Tonight, his hands clenched just a little tighter around his coffee mug. He walked to the sliding glass door and looked out over the yard he'd mowed himself every Saturday since 1994. The same yard where he built his deck, laid every brick, painted every board. He didn't serve his country just to be disrespected in his own backyard. And there it was, the ripple, the movement, a silhouette climbing out of the water, drying off with a towel that sure as hell didn't belong to him. Jerome didn't shout. He didn't storm outside. He just exhaled slowly, turned off the porch light, and whispered to himself, "Tomorrow, we're done playing nice." Because when a man's home is violated, his silence doesn't mean weakness. It means he's watching, waiting, and ready. Jerome Davis wasn't just another neighbor. He was the kind of man you didn't disrespect twice. A former Marine turned decorated police officer, Jerome had spent his life protecting others, first overseas, then on the streets of his hometown. He didn't talk much. He didn't need to. His presence alone carried the weight of quiet authority. When he walked into a room, people noticed, not because he demanded attention, but because he didn't need to. He had lived in that modest brick house for over 30 years. He built it with his bare hands, every nail a memory, every corner a story. 3 kids were raised under that roof, on a cop's paycheck and a backbone of steel. His wife, now passed, used to say, "Jerome doesn't raise his voice, he raises standards." And now some golf superstar with a god complex was helping himself to his pool like it was a hotel amenity. It wasn't the swimming that angered Jerome, it was the entitlement. The assumption that fame came with a key to someone else's life. A man like Jerome understood the value of boundaries. He didn't cross them, and he sure as hell didn't let others do it either. So no, he didn't rage. He didn't make threats. He made a plan. The next morning, while the neighborhood brewed coffee and watered lawns, Jerome reviewed his surveillance footage. Time-stamped, clear, undeniable. Tiger wasn't sneaking, he was strutting, like the world belonged to him. Jerome loaded everything onto a thumb drive and slid it into his shirt pocket. He didn't tell his neighbors. He didn't vent online. That's not how real men operate. He stood in front of his bathroom mirror, straightened the collar of his faded Marine Corps t-shirt, and said one thing to his reflection: respect is earned, and if he won't learn it the easy way... He walked out the door, not with anger, but with a purpose forged in discipline. Because Jerome Davis didn't fight for this country just to let someone like Tiger Woods walk all over it. Or him. Not today. Not ever. The next night, Jerome sat at his kitchen table, a black coffee in one hand and his laptop open in front of him. No news, no distractions, just cold, hard footage. He clicked play. There he was, Tiger Woods, world-renowned athlete, slipping through the gap in the side fence like it was part of his daily routine. Except it wasn't just his routine. It was Jerome's yard, Jerome's pool, Jerome's peace. The timestamp read 2:43 a.m. 2 nights ago. The next clip showed the same thing, 4 nights ago, only this time Tiger wasn't alone. 2 other men, loud laughter, beer bottles clinking, one of them even diving in like it was a country club pool party. Jerome watched without blinking. It wasn't just trespassing. It was entitlement wrapped in celebrity. But instead of losing his temper, he did what he'd always done. Build the truth brick by brick. He organized the footage, compiled screenshots, and added printed logs from 3 separate nights. Then he called his neighbor, Mrs. Carter, whose kitchen window faced the pool. "I've seen the lights on late," she said. "Didn't want to say anything, but I thought it was strange." Jerome nodded. "You weren't wrong." By the end of the night, Jerome had a folder in his hands thick with proof, not just motion sensor screenshots and surveillance stills, but handwritten statements from two neighbors. He included his own notes, time-stamped by the minute. He didn't need likes. He didn't want headlines. He wanted accountability. Standing by the window, looking out at the now still water, he whispered, "This ain't about a pool. This is about respect." Because when a man builds something with his own hands, he doesn't let anyone, not even a household name, treat it like a playground. Tiger wasn't just trespassing anymore. He was challenging the wrong man. The next morning, the sun rose to find Jerome Davis already in motion. No sirens, no patrol cars, no noise, just him, steel-eyed, silent, and dressed like the day he walked into basic training. Collared shirt, clean shave, documents in hand. He pulled up to the towering gate of the Woods estate. It was all glass and ego. Cameras mounted on every angle. Two security guards stood at attention behind the wrought iron fence, their earpieces twitching. "I'm here to speak with Mr. Woods," Jerome said, his voice calm, unshaken. "Do you have an appointment?" the taller one asked, glancing down at Jerome like he hadn't just spoken to a man who bled for this country. "No," Jerome replied, "but I have something more important." He held up the manila folder, thick, weighted, labeled neatly in bold black ink, "Trespassing incidents, private property, evidence enclosed." The guards looked at each other, unsure. You could see the corporate training battling their common sense. "Sir, Mr. Woods isn't available." Jerome stepped closer. Not threatening, just undeniably present. "Then you can tell him this. The man whose pool he's been sneaking into is standing at his gate, and he's got something to say." A pause. Then a call on the radio. A whisper behind the glass. 5 minutes later, a sleek black SUV rolled down the driveway. Out stepped Tiger Woods, sunglasses on, golf glove in one hand, casual smirk on his face. Jerome didn't flinch, didn't blink, just looked him in the eye and said, "We need to talk." Tiger scoffed, like it was all some misunderstanding, like this wasn't real. But Jerome handed him the folder anyway. Everything's in there. Proof, statements, footage, and one very simple message: you disrespected the wrong man. Tiger's smile faltered, because what stood in front of him wasn't a bitter neighbor. It was a man who'd had enough, and came with the truth. No noise, no backup, just accountability, delivered by hand. The air was heavy with heat and pride as Jerome followed Tiger's assistant around the side of the estate. Palm trees swayed lazily in the breeze, casting long shadows across the marble patio. There he was, Tiger Woods, reclining in a lounge chair with a drink in one hand and that same smirk on his face. It was the kind of grin that worked on cameras and cocktail parties, but it wasn't working here. Jerome didn't sit. He stood firm, documents in hand, eyes locked. A Marine's stance, a father's glare. A man who earned his space and wasn't about to see it taken without a fight. Tiger glanced at the folder, then back at Jerome. "You really came all the way over here about a pool?" he asked, chuckling. "Come on, man, it's just water." Jerome didn't blink. "No," he replied, voice like gravel under pressure. "It's my water, my home, my rules." The laughter stopped. Tiger leaned back, suddenly unsure if this was going the way he thought it would. "You know who I am?" he asked, not with arrogance, but with the realization that it might not matter here. "I know exactly who you are," Jerome said, stepping forward. "And I know exactly who I am. A man who fought for his country, raised his kids with honor, and earned every inch of what you've been treating like your vacation rental." Silence. The sound of the wind against the umbrellas. The rustling of paper as Jerome dropped the folder onto the patio table between them. "This isn't about water, Mr. Woods. It's about respect." For a long moment, Tiger said nothing. He looked at the folder, then at Jerome, and for the first time he didn't have a comeback. Because it wasn't just a confrontation anymore, it was a reckoning. The next morning, Jerome Davis didn't check social media. He never had an account. But by 7 o'clock a.m., his phone wouldn't stop buzzing. "Jerome, you're on TV. You're trending, man. Check Channel 4, they're playing the video." He didn't understand what they meant, until his neighbor's son ran over, holding up his phone. There it was, grainy cell phone footage, captured from a second-story window across the fence. Jerome standing tall, Tiger slouching in disbelief. The folder landing on the patio table like a judge's gavel. The caption? "Ex-officer puts Tiger in his place." It spread like wildfire. Talk shows picked it up. Podcasts debated it. News anchors couldn't stop dissecting the tense, uncomfortable moment between a humble homeowner and one of the world's most famous athletes. Most spun it like they always do. Celebrity versus civilian, power versus principle. But something shifted. This time, America didn't side with the celebrity. Jerome's mailbox began to fill, not with bills, but handwritten letters. A retired teacher from Kansas wrote, "Thank you for standing up for the rest of us." A young couple from Georgia said, "You reminded us that respect still matters." Even a few former officers sent challenge coins with notes that read, "Semper Fi, brother." Jerome didn't ask for any of it. He just sat on his porch, same way he had for decades, watching the sun rise over the same patch of grass he'd watered since the 90s. But something was different now. Not in him, but in how people saw him. He didn't confront Tiger Woods for attention. He did it because some things are worth protecting: a man's home, his values, and the principle that fame doesn't place you above decency. In a world that seemed to bend to power and celebrity, Jerome Davis had reminded everyone what it looks like when a man stands his ground. No camera crew, no microphone. Just one man and the truth. And that was more powerful than any headline. The fallout came faster than Tiger ever expected. By noon, his phone was blowing up, not with fans or congratulatory texts, but with panicked messages from publicists, attorneys, and brand reps. "Have you seen the footage? Why didn't you stop him from recording? Damage control, we need it now." But it was too late. You can spin a bad game. You can rehab a failed sponsorship, but you can't outspin the truth, especially when it's wearing boots and standing on its own front lawn. Tiger tried to laugh it off in an interview, calling the incident a minor misunderstanding with a neighbor. He even chuckled about it, saying, "It's just a pool," but that clip didn't go viral. What did? Jerome's voice, firm, steady, unforgettable. "No, it's my water, my home, my rules." That wasn't a soundbite. That was a statement. Suddenly, the headlines changed. Tiger faces backlash over private pool dispute. Decorated veteran school celebrity over boundaries. Respect isn't optional. Jerome's words echoed far beyond the neighborhood. They hit something deeper in people, the craving for accountability in an era where power too often skips consequences. Sponsors took notice. A luxury watch brand paused their partnership. A sports drink company pulled his latest campaign ad. Tiger's team scrambled to patch the leaks, but the damage had already soaked through. Because when a man like Jerome Davis speaks, people listen, not because he's loud, but because he's right. And Tiger, he wasn't facing a PR crisis. He was facing a character check, and he was failing it. All the money in the world couldn't fix what got exposed. A simple truth, spoken by a quiet man with a backbone of steel: respect isn't optional, and America agreed. The sound of post drivers echoed across the yard as the first steel poles went into the ground. Jerome stood there, arms crossed, boots planted in the freshly turned dirt, not supervising, guarding, like always. He didn't call a fancy contractor. He didn't hire a landscaping architect. He called two buddies from his Marine days, men who knew how to measure twice, cut once, and build something meant to last. By sunset, the framework was in place. 10 feet high, solid, no frills. Not meant to intimidate, just meant to remind. Neighbors walked by, some with puzzled looks, others nodding in quiet solidarity. One stopped and asked, "Jerome, building a fortress?" He smiled slightly, wiping sweat from his brow. Not a fortress. A line. Because for Jerome, this fence wasn't about fear, it was about principle. He wasn't worried about Tiger coming back. He wasn't scared of future trespassers. What he wanted, what he needed, was a physical statement that said what too many people had forgotten. This land was earned. It deserves respect. Every board, every bolt, every inch of it meant something. Not just a barrier, but a symbol. The local paper caught wind. They came by, asked for a comment. Jerome didn't say much. He just pointed to the finished fence and said, "This ain't to keep people out, it's to remind them what earned ground looks like." That quote ended up on bumper stickers, t-shirts, even church billboards. But Jerome didn't care about any of that. He cared that his home, his space, his peace was finally protected again. And maybe, just maybe, he'd reminded the world of something too many folks had forgotten. Respecting a man's space is the first step to respecting the man. And when you cross that line, you better be ready for what's waiting on the other side. The studio lights were bright. The stage was polished. The interviewer leaned in with perfectly rehearsed concern. And there he sat. Tiger Woods, live on national television. Gone was the swagger. Gone was the smirk. What remained was a man backed into a corner, his image bruised, his reputation hanging by a thread. He took a breath, looked into the camera, and said the words his PR team had likely rehearsed 100 times. "To Mr. Davis and everyone I disrespected, I want to sincerely apologize." He paused, as if waiting for applause. But none came. The network aired it across all platforms. Headlines read, "Tiger breaks his silence." Some called it courageous. Others called it damage control. But back in Middletown, Ohio, Jerome Davis just sat on his porch, sipping his coffee like he did every morning. A young reporter caught up with him a few hours later, mic in hand. "Mr. Davis, how do you feel about the apology?" she asked, eyes wide with anticipation. Jerome didn't flinch. He just looked out over his yard, the same yard he'd protected, defended, and rebuilt with his own 2 hands. "I didn't do this for an apology," he said plainly. "I wasn't looking for attention, I was looking for respect." The reporter blinked. She waited, maybe expecting a media-ready soundbite or some fiery quote. But Jerome had said all he needed to. Because for men like him, truth doesn't need embellishment, it just needs to be heard, and that's exactly what the world had done. Tiger's apology might have made headlines, but Jerome's silence carried more weight. He didn't demand anything. He didn't sue. He didn't gloat. Because when a man stands on principle, he doesn't need payback. He just needs people to know where the line is and what happens when it's crossed. Summer came early that year. The air was thick with warmth. Kids rode their bikes past familiar mailboxes and grills fired up every weekend. America turned the page. And in the middle of it all, Jerome Davis's pool sat quiet, still, undisturbed. No camera crews, no influencers, no uninvited guests. Just a man, his porch, and the soft sound of wind through the fence line he built with intention. Jerome still maintained his routine, mowing every Saturday, checking the filter on Sundays, skimming the water every morning at dawn. Not because someone might sneak in again, but because earned ground is cared for, even when no one's watching. Neighbors would wave, slow down as they passed. Some stopped by to shake his hand. "You made us proud, Jerome. You reminded folks what lines are for. You showed the world how a man handles disrespect, with truth, not tantrums." But Jerome never boasted, never played the hero, because in his mind, he didn't win anything. He just did what every American should be able to do, defend what's his. Reporters eventually stopped calling. The story faded. The world moved on. But that fence, that pool, that quiet, it all remained. And in that stillness, something powerful had taken root, not just in Jerome's backyard, but across the country. He had reminded America that even the biggest names, the most powerful celebrities, still answer to the smallest laws. That respect isn't written in contracts or earned in headlines. It's forged in character, reinforced in action, and protected by men who don't bend. So yes, the pool stood still, but what it represented, that still echoes. A reminder that boundaries matter, that honor isn't outdated, and that when the world forgets the meaning of respect, a quiet man with calloused hands might just remind them.